Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it is a great honor for me to introduce the speaker for this special session of the European Development Days. The man you will be listening to in a few moments gives full meaning to the word humanity. When you listen to him, or when you are lucky enough to talk to him, your life cannot be the same anymore. He has in his eyes a unique combination of gentleness and strength. His words shake individual and collective consciousness. His fight is one of the noblest, since it is putting in danger his life and the lives of his loved ones. In one of the most beautiful regions of the world, Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, he is the daily witness of the worst atrocities against the weakest. Dr. Mukwege has dedicated his life to the treatment of victims of rape and sexual violence. He has pioneered a comprehensive approach covering medical care, psychological support, socio-economic reinsertion, and legal assistance. Thousands of women and girls have benefited from his expertise. But more than that, much more than that, thousands of women and girls have regained dignity, hope, and trust in a better future thanks to him. His efforts and dedication have been rewarded by numerous honors and decorations around the world, including the 2014 Sakharov Prize from the European Parliament. Dr. Mukwege, your fight is my fight as well. We are all eager to hear what you have to say in this special address to the European Development Days. The floor is yours, Dr. Mukwege.
Je tiens d'abord
First and foremost, I should like to express my gratitude to Commissioner Mimica for having introduced me and for having projected a message which warms our heart and which touches us very deeply. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful and thank you for having given me the opportunity to speak to you during the 9th European Development Day. In a world which is dominated by competition, cooperation should aim to be the cornerstone of a more just world. It should reflect solidarity amongst peoples who share common humanity. Cooperation development, rather, is a manifestation of our will in advanced countries to work together in a spirit of partnership with countries in the process of developing, aimed at creating conditions that are favorable for creating a world without poverty, allowing each individual to benefit from the opportunity of having a decent life with human dignity. To my mind, development aid is altruistic and noble, and it certainly cannot be construed as pity, but rather, again, as a manifestation of our increasing awareness of a shared responsibility as human beings sharing the same fate. Our world is increasingly interdependent, and thus man should understand that his life, his dignity, and his safety depends upon the dignity and safety of his fellow human beings. Peace and prosperity in Europe depend upon the stability and the development of other countries throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we are convinced that globalization of economic relationships should go hand in hand with a strengthening of the universal principle of human rights. Protection of human dignity should be at the heart, at the center of all strategies and all development policies, and should be informed and guided by the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, which guarantees to each human being the right to security and a decent life. Thanks to development cooperation, we now have the opportunity to dream of a world without poverty. Opposing development aid would be tantamount to withdrawing oneself from the world, closing oneself in isolation, and that is in contradiction to the spirit of cooperation. Development cooperation is not just the cornerstone of a more just world, but it is also fundamental to a world in which individual liberties and security are respected. Ladies and gentlemen, today, all of us, when we project a desire for a more just world where poverty is eliminated, might be perceived as being utopian. Many people think that poverty is a choice, or that poverty is simply part of one's fate. We take the view that injustice and poverty have been created by man with a view to dominating and crushing his fellow human beings in order to accumulate wealth without any moral or ethical consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, a more just world without poverty is not utopian, and it certainly isn't part of our fate. Implementing ethical principles in the production of wealth and equitable mechanisms for redistribution of wealth can eradicate poverty in many countries which today are in the process of developing. As I said earlier, development cooperation is noble, but unfortunately it can lead to distortions. Allow me to explain. When a donor provides aid, simply because he or she wishes to feel less guilty, he knows that money, in all likelihood, will be wasted and end up in the pockets of dignitaries who are not accountable. Or when aid is given because of geostrategic reasons, for example, before the fall of the Berlin Wall, development aid was systematically conditioned by ideological concerns. And unfortunately, this mentality has remained anchored in the minds of many people working in cooperation agencies today. Or when a donor gives money with the explicit or tacit indication that this money should benefit the donor country's companies by hiring non-qualified or non-skilled persons, there is a problem. Benefiting from aid puts an individual in a situation where he can take no pleasure because having to depend upon external aid places him in a situation where his independence and sense of initiative is imperiled, undermined, and in the end, development aid impoverishes people. I take the view that donors and beneficiaries of aid should work in concert together, should have a shared vision and objectives. They are co-responsible in attending to cooperation aid and the way in which it is used. Ladies and gentlemen, development aid only makes sense if it allows those benefiting from it to emerge from poverty. If after 50 or 60 years a country continues to receive aid, whereas their socioeconomic conditions are in decline, then we must say that that aid for development is many things, but certainly not noble. In some cases, development aid from a country is such that it would be better to give nothing at all. So these conditions which I've just described should lead us to redefine the notion of shared responsibility between donors and beneficiaries. We believe that we first need to change the way people think. Development aid and cooperation should be carried out with full respect of each partner. The donor and the beneficiary should be working in concert as partners on the basis of mutual respect. The fact of giving aid should not imply that the donor is superior, just as the fact of receiving aid should not imply in any way that an individual is inferior. Secondly, we must take account of endogenous factors. And in this context, we cannot see the South as having nothing to offer. In many cases, it is possible to build cooperation on the basis of conditions which already exist at local level, drawing benefit from added value, which is local added value, without having to depend upon input from the outside. Unfortunately, for many countries in Africa, particularly my country, the Democratic Republic of Congo, despite good intentions for development, they are stymied because of obstacles. What are they? Repetitive wars, democratic deficit, poor governance, siphoning off of riches, the brain drain, the absence of independent administration of justice, as well as the fact that women are excluded from managing public affairs. Allow me to address the first factor, the first obstacle, repetitive wars. We know that there cannot be development without peace, without respect of human rights. Safety and respect of human rights are conditions sine qua non, absolutely indispensable for anyone wishing to achieve sustainable development. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, millions of euros and millions of dollars in development aid have been spent without there having been a concomitant increase in economic growth, without having a considerable and significant improvement of living conditions for the majority of the Congolese population. Why did this happen? This is in large part due to the fact that this is an area afflicted by instability and continuous conflict. In many areas, many regions of Congo, it's more realistic to talk about regression when talking about development. Regression in the area of protection of fundamental rights, protection of cultural, social, economic, political, and civil rights. And this is the reason for which we plead for peace and justice. Without legal and physical security, no development project can be made sustainable or consolidated. And thus, it is absolutely imperative that the international community, as well as the European Union, pursue their efforts to support the authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo as they set about carrying out a root and branch reform of the security sector. But this must also include reform of the army, the police, as well as the prison system and the administration whereby justice is rendered. The second obstacle for us is the democratic deficit and poor governance. Thus, the international community, as well as the European Union, should encourage all players to engage in a constructive dialogue aimed at increasing those areas of freedom enjoyed by citizens. The European Union, as well as its member states, should accompany and support credible, free elections. And if indeed that is not possible, they should suspend direct aid from the states, because the population, if conditions are allowed to continue, is oppressed. And this is in compliance with the cooperation agreements in any event. International cooperation and development aid cannot strengthen corrupt institutions which have abandoned the public good. In order for a partnership for efficient aid to be created, it must be guided and linked to progress in the area of respect of human rights and democratic principles. Without making tangible efforts to improve safety and security and fostering democratic governance, development aid will not be able to reinforce institutions, will not be able to improve the living conditions of the population, and even less contribute to the fight against poverty. The European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights, the EDDH, we think could do better, could make a greater contribution to helping civil society, most particularly women's associations, in order to help communities to heal in a post-conflict period, organizing activities, monitoring a peace process, monitoring elections, and encouraging the population to become responsible citizens in participation in democracy, making their authorities accountable. The third obstacle we have to face has to do with siphoning off of riches. In the speech which I gave in Strasbourg when I received the Sakharov Prize, the award, rather, I underscored the fact that the Democratic Republic of Congo does have the capacity to develop. It has endogenous capacity, thanks to its natural resources and, above all, thanks to human resources, its population. But unfortunately, the people living in Democratic Republic of Congo cannot exploit their natural resources for the benefit of everyone because of this very gray area in which they live, neither peace nor war. My country has always been a key driver in globalization and in the development of the modern world. Examples, cases in point, are various industries, such as the rubber industry. The rubber industry allowed development of the automobile industry in Europe. Uranium helped us put an end to the Second World War and introduced the nuclear era. From Congo, one has also mined tungsten and tantalum, which have allowed us to revolutionize the way that we communicate with one another. In other words, Congo has always been at the center of progress. But unfortunately, this progress has never been achieved by a just means, has not been clean, in inverted commas, and has not been shared. Our resources have allowed progress to be achieved in Europe and in the rest of the world, but has never brought about development and benefit for local communities where these raw materials have been mined, and the benefits have never been put to the service of the Congolese population, despite the fact that, well, apart from a few leaders or businessmen who have been able to benefit from it because they have no scruples and they're avaricious. With great humility, I would like to pay tribute to the political courage of MEPs who have voted in their last plenary session in Strasbourg in favor of binding European legislation aimed at framing a transparent trade in minerals. They have decided to break the chains of blood minerals and trade in those minerals, and I salute them. One of the most profound causes of recurrent conflicts has to do with violation of human rights, such as sexual violence, which is widespread, and the consequences of which we set about to repair in our hospital in Panzi. Unfortunately, now we are dealing with victims, a second generation of victims. Civil society aspires to see heads of state and government come together in council to support Parliament's position within the EU to align on standards produced by the OECD and which have produced binding regulations which have already been adopted by the United States and other African countries, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo. What are these regulations about? They will give a signal, a clear signal to companies and to citizens, indicating that greater transparency is the goal and it's pursued. Transparent trade at every link of the supply chain, which is also traceable, will allow the European Union to contribute to putting an end to the exploitation of children who work in inhuman conditions in mines, to put an end to mass rape, which tears communities apart and which forces these populations to become displaced and to go into exile. This will allow a win-win partnership. This alone is the path to sustainable development. A fourth obstacle we must overcome is the brain drain. Human resources are the most precious resource that a country can have. But all too often, less developed countries see their population leave. That is the brain drain. If you take a plane and you disembark in Brussels or Paris, 2 times out of 3, you will be in a taxi driven by an African driver. And when you talk to the taxi driver, you discover that most of them have diplomas. They're very qualified. If you go into a Belgian or a French hospital, in all likelihood, you will be taken care of by an African doctor or taken care of by an African nurse. Ladies and gentlemen, know that in the region where I live, there are very few doctors indeed. We have 1 doctor for every 10,000 inhabitants. Respecting everyone's freedom to choose has led us to experience instability and inequalities and lack of opportunities for the countries of origin, the countries from whence the populations go to other places to work and live. So this has got to be turned around. The 5th obstacle is the lack of an independent judiciary. The development in less developed countries requires rule of law, strong institutions, but all too often a climate of corruption and impunity reigns, which favors the elite and undermines the general interest for personal enrichment. Justice is a fundamental key which conditions healthy and equitable development. But we're talking about legal security and certainty for everyone, not just foreign investors or individuals. And the 6th obstacle that we have to overcome has to do with the fact that women are excluded, frequently excluded from participating in public life. A more just world can only be built if we have full participation of half of its population. 20 years after the Beijing summit, we must recognize that gender equality remains a priority objective in order to achieve sustainable development in the world. Women are still underrepresented in all decision-taking entities and are victim of discrimination from their birth, within their families, in the world of work, in all sectors of society. We know that the best investment that we can make in our societies is investing in women. And now this is not just an opinion. We know that this is a certainty, because when we invest in women, we invest in our families, our communities. This accrues to the benefit of society at large. In Pansy, our hospital, we aspire to obviously deal with the consequences engendered by violence to women, but we would like to return to our initial objective. When we founded our hospital, our first goal was to help women give birth. Every day, we work with women who are a source of inspiration and strength for us because they are courageous, they are determined to transform their suffering into a vehicle, a driver for change, put to the benefit of peace and progress for everyone. Throughout the years, we've developed a holistic way of providing care to these women based on 4 pillars. medical and surgical, psychosocial, socioeconomic, and legal. We initially started providing simply medical and surgical assistance, but we realized that that would be ineffective unless we attended to their suffering. So we decided to provide psychosocial aid, and then we realized that they needed to be helped to reintegrate their societies. So we had to attend to socioeconomic factors. We wanted to help them return to their communities, supported and strong. These three pillars, unfortunately, were not enough. In order to be healthy, psychologically and physically, in order to enjoy good socioeconomic conditions, you have to receive reparation for the damage that has been done to you, and that can only be done through legal means. Thus, we've decided to add a fourth pillar, and this holistic model for aid developed in Panzi has already been replicated in the South Kivu province in two rural health areas. It's called a one-stop center. These are areas where reproductive and maternal health is at risk, and this one-stop center allows women to receive all of these services that meet their needs. Particularly, we ensure that they are not stigmatized because they've been victims of sexual violence. In order to achieve this, we are working in concert with the Congolese health system at large so as to achieve cooperation. Without peace, without democracy, without good governance, without coherent development policy, without these elements, aid will not improve the living conditions of the vast majority of our population. Politicians, practitioners in the area of development, players from the private sector and civil society, each play a role and each have a shared responsibility in building a more just world. Now, it is no longer enough to talk about this. We have to mobilize all of our energy so as to move from this discourse to palpable acts to attain sustainable development, which is just and inclusive. Thank you very much indeed.